Hello everyone, this is Rig. Welcome to an episode where we will discuss about the early Vedic period. Now, we have already discussed about the ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia, Egypt and Indus. Coming to the Indian subcontinent, Indus Valley civilization is the earliest form of settlement found in India. However, if we move forward right up to 1500 BC, then we will find that people settled in the northern part of Indian subcontinent. That settlement was called the early Vedic period. So in this video we are going to get into details about the early Vedic period. This video is catered according to the ICSE syllabus of class 6. However, anyone interested in the topic can go through this video. Please carry a notebook with you so that you can note down the important points, and also the last portion of this video contains question answers which will be beneficial for your exams. So let's start with the early Vedic period. Aryan invasion theory. Now, before we start with the early Vedic period, we need to understand who were the Aryans and how did they invade India. So that has been compiled into Aryan invasion theory. Arrival of Aryans. So around 1500 BC, inhabitants arrived in north and northwest India, calling themselves Arjo or Aryans. So these were the people who arrived in northwest or northern part of Indian subcontinent around 1500 BC. Most historians believe Aryans were nomadic people from Central Asia. So most of the historians have drawn the conclusion that Aryans are people who are from Central Asia, especially around the area of the Caspian Sea. So their population growth forced them to leave their original home, seeking new pastures. So since their population was increasing, they were forced to migrate in order to search for new areas for settlement. Those migrating to India came to be known as Indo-Aryans. So Indo-Aryans are the people who migrated from Central Asia to Indians. First settled in the region of seven rivers named Brahmavarta. So they first settled in the region of seven rivers, that is the Sapta Sindhu region. Sapta Sindhu region consists of the tributaries of Indus river itself and Saraswati river. So these make the seven rivers called the Sapta Sindhu area, and they named the settlement as Brahmavarta. They introduced Sanskrit in northern India. So in the field of language, their contribution was that they brought Sanskrit in northern India. Max Muller identifies Central Asia as their origin based on language studies. So Max Muller was a historian who identified that Central Asia is the homeland of the Aryans based on the similarities he found on language. Aryans influenced India's language and culture deeply. Now, here is one important thing which you need to understand. Aryan invasion theory in current historical research has been proved to be false, because in the about 20 to 30 years ago, DNA studies were not prevalent. But right now, when people have analyzed DNA studies, have analyzed the Aryan invasion theory more scientifically with the help of DNA, that time people or historians have realized that no people came from outside. It was a fake theory promoted in order to create a division between northern part of Indian subcontinent and southern part of Indian subcontinent. It was mainly promoted by the Europeans. We don't know why ICSE is following the this theory, because this has already been discarded. Division of the Vedic period. So how was Vedic period divided? Early Vedic period dated between 1500 BC and 1000 BC, located mainly in the Sapta Sindhu. So early Vedic period, the entire Vedic period of roughly 1000 years have been divided into two phases. Each phase consists of 500 years. So beginning with the early Vedic period, it starts from 1500 BC to 1000 BC, and this is located in the Sapta Sindhu region, known from the earliest text, the Rig Veda. So about this early Vedic period, we get information from the earliest text, that is the Rig Veda. Early Vedic period is also called Rig Vedic period, since most of the source about early Vedic period is procured from the Rig Veda. That is why early Vedic period is also called Rig Vedic period. Between 1000 BC and 600 BC, Aryans moved to the Gangetic plains, and this period is called as later Vedic period. So early Vedic period is in the Sapta Sindhu region, whereas later Vedic period is in the Gangetic plains. Region under their control is known as the land of Aryans or Aryavarta. So the region which was under the control of the Aryans is called as Aryavarta. Movement from northwest to Gangetic Valley. So there was a geographical shift where people moved, or the Aryans moved from northwest to the Gangetic Valley. Transition marked by changes in the settlement and society. So there was a cultural continuity which has been marked by the changes or transition in the settlement and society. Settlements. How were the settlements of the early Vedic period? So, geographical area, the Aryans lived in eastern Afghanistan, Punjab, and western Uttar Pradesh fringes. So, their area of dominion was in eastern Afghanistan, which is the border with Pakistan, present day Pakistan, Punjab, and western Uttar Pradesh fringes. So, these were the areas where settlements of early Vedic period occurred, known as the land of seven rivers in Rig Veda. So this area is known as Sapta Sindhu according to Rig Veda, which means land of seven rivers. Major rivers. What are the major rivers? Sindhu is the Indus River. While discussing about Indus Valley Civilization, I have already discussed about Sindhu River and Saraswati along with tributaries. So Indus and Saraswati, Saraswati River currently has been lost. We do not find any remaining or running evidence of Saraswati River. However, we find geographical evidences of the long lost Saraswati River. So, Indus River, Saraswati River, and the tributaries of Indus make up in total seven in count. Hence, the area was known as Sapta Sindhu or the land of seven rivers. Gomati, Krumu, Kuva mentioned in Rig Veda. So these are the other rivers who have been mentioned in Rig Veda, that is Gomati, Krumu and Kubha. Satadri, which is Satluj, Bipas, which is Bias, Purushini, which is Ravi, Ashikni, which is Chenab, and Vitatsa, Jhelum. These are the five tributaries of Indus River. So thus we get a collection of the rivers which make the land very fertile. Region is considered sacred and divine. So this region, according to ancient India, was considered to be sacred and holy or divine. Similarities with oldest Iranian text in gods, names and social classes. So Rig Veda and Zendavesta were the two texts which had a lot of similarities, and those similarities were in the context of gods names and social classes. Now we will see what were the main features of the Vedic literature. So definition: Vedas are the main source of early Vedic history. Vedas are the main source. And what does the word Veda mean, or where does it originate from? So it is derived from Vid, meaning knowledge. Vid means knowledge. Vid has evolved into Vedas, considered eternal, containing collective wisdom. So the wisdom of the Vedas, or the teachings of the Vedas, are considered eternal, means it is applicable throughout time, means it is applicable throughout human history, and so it is said to have been containing collective wisdom passed orally before being written in Sanskrit. So the Vedas were stored, or Vedas were passed down from one generation to another with the help of a technique called Shruti and Smriti. Shruti means to hear and Smriti means to remember. So the current generation will teach it to future generation, and future generation will teach it to the next generation. That is how Vedas were transmitted, and finally it was written down in Sanskrit. Rig Ved is the oldest, and it was composed around 1500 BC. It contains 1028 hymns, which are called Shukta, for sacrificial rituals. So it contains 1028 hymns, and all these hymns describe different sacrificial rituals. Samved tunes for Rig Veda prayers. So Samved basically contains the tunes for the prayers which are present in Rig Veda. Yajurved contains hymns and rituals reflecting social and political setup. So we get a lot of knowledge about the early Vedic society and political setup from Yajurveda. Atharvaved contains songs, spells, and charms to ward off evil spirits. So Atharvaved is the most recent of the Vedas, which contains songs, spells, and charms, which also means it contains magical elements which are used to ward off or to drive away evil spirits or negative energy. Other texts are there like Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads, and epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. So these are other texts belonging from the Vedic period. All these together make up the Vedic literature. Political structure. How was the political structure of the early Vedic people? So the society was mainly tribal, and it was based on kinship and family ties. So everyone was connected with one another based on kinship and family ties, and that led to the birth of tribal society. Several families formed a grama led by a gramini. So a gram is a village, and several families together formed a gram. Who was the head of gram? Gramini. Villages formed a vis headed by a vispati. Several vis formed a jana. So several villages grouped together to form a vis, which the head of vis was called vispati, and several vis grouped together to form a jana. Rajan was the strongest man, protector, and spiritual leader. So, Rajan was the earliest form of king we find in ancient India, and he was the strongest man in the society. His duty was to protect the people from any kind of misadventures, and also he was the main spiritual leader of the people. Purohit conducted rituals and advised the king. So Purohit were the people who conducted spiritual rituals, and they also advised the king. Senani led the army. Purohit does not mean a person who used to conduct pujas. Purohits are the terms given to administrative officials, higher post administrative officials, whose duty was definitely to conduct rituals, but also along with that they were supposed to take care of administration. Purohits were often great scholars, Assemblies were there, Sabha, which means Council of Elders, and Samiti, which means the General Assembly, checked king's power. So even though the Rajan was the strongest man, he could not do whatever he wished to. So there were assemblies like the Council of Elders, which is Sabha, and Samiti, which is the General Assembly. Their main duty was to keep a check on the king's power. Women's role. Women could participate in assemblies. So in the early Vedic time, women were very important and they were respected very much in the society. And so women could also participate in these assemblies. Assemblies advised and guided the ruler in governance. So decision making power also rested up to a large extent on the hands of the assemblies. Society, family life and position of women. So how was the family life and what was the position of women in the society? Family unit. Family was the basic unit of Vedic society with a patriarchal structure. So family was the basic unit. Everything that the people did centered around its family's welfare. So family was the basic unit and the male person was the head of the family. So it was patriarchal in structure. The eldest living male member was the head called Grihapati. So, who was the head of the family? The eldest living male member. And the term given to the head of the family was Grihapati. Joint family systems. Families were large joint units with several generations living under one roof. So, families were large joint units and several generations of the family lived under the same roof or lived in the same house. Equal status for women. This is very significant because we have a misconception that women were treated very badly during the earlier times. But if we go to the Vedic period, early Vedic period to be exact, then women were treated as equals to men and had opportunities for education. Later on, obviously, the system deteriorated, but during the early Vedic time, women were treated equal to men and they received equal opportunities. Some composed Vedic hymns like Gargi and Maitreyi, who were famous philosophers. So there were women scholars during the early Vedic time, like Gargi and Maitreyi. They were famous philosophers of the early Vedic period or the Rig Vedic period. Religious participation. Women took part in all religious ceremonies, which could not be performed without their peasants. So, no religious ceremony could be performed without women. So, women took part in all religious ceremonies. Women could choose husbands through Swayamvar. Monogamy was common. So it was the duty of women to choose their own husband. Husbands were naturally not forced upon women. So women had the right to choose their own husbands, and the ceremony through which women selected their husband was called Swayamvar. Most of the marriages were monogamous in nature, means one partner. A person could have one partner. No child marriage and widows could remarry. So you can see how advanced the mentality of the early Vedic period was. There was no child marriage and the widows, if because of some unfortunate reason the husband of a woman dies, then the widows could remarry. Now we will see the other aspects of this society, that is dress, food and amusement. So how the people decorated themselves, what they ate and how they spent their time. So garments had dresses including two garments. The lower garments, which was the dhoti, and dhoti was tied in the west and upper garments flung over the shoulder. So there the dress was divided into two garments, dhoti which was The lower garment and upper garment was a piece of cloth which was flung over the shoulder. Headgear and jewelry. Turbans were worn. Turbans translates to pagris. So turbans were worn. Both men and women used gold, silver, and precious stone ornaments. So turbans were very common, and both men and women used gold, silver, and other kind of precious stones in order to decorate themselves through various jewelries. Food was very simple. Nutritious food was there consisting of wheat, barley, maize, fruits and vegetables along with milk and milk products. So nutritious food consisted of wheat, barley and maize. Fruits were also there. People also consumed large amount of vegetables along with milk and different milk products like ghee, butter, curd, etc. Consumed intoxicating drinks like soma and sura. So these were drinks which were used as beverages in the Rig Vedic period. Meat consumption was also there. Meat was eaten occasionally. Enjoyed chariot racing, hunting, and gambling. So, outdoor activities practiced as a source of entertainment by the Rig Vedic period people included chariot racing, hunting, and gambling. Indoor games were also there. They played dice and board games. Music and dance were very popular. So, dice and board games were also there. People also entertained themselves with music and dance. Religion. How was the religion of the Rig Vedic period? So they worshipped one creator of the universe and various natural forces. So according to the Rig Vedic period, the creator of the universe was one. However, that one power could be worshipped through various natural forces. Major gods included Indra, who was the god of rain and thunder. Agni was there, who was the god of fire. Varun meant god of water. Surya was the god of sun, Vayu wind, Soma plants, Usha dawn, and Yama death. So they worship the natural elements in the form of many gods through which they could worship one creator. So one creator was worshipped in the form of various natural elements. Mostly male gods, few female deities. So mostly all the Rig Vedic gods were male and there were a very few female deities. Worshipped in open air through hymns and offerings. So the gods were worshipped not in temples but in open air through hymns and different kinds of offerings by the people. Brahmanas performed yajnas or sacrifices. Now, what do you mean by sacrifice? Sacrifice means in order to get blessing from the Almighty, you will have to give something in return. And whatever you give in return is your sacrifice. And that happened through sacrificial rituals, which were called yagyas or yajnas. So, Brahmins performed yagyas or sacrifices. All gods seen as forms of one supreme being. So the belief system was that there is one supreme being and all gods are the way through which you worship that one supreme being. They did not build temples or idols in the early Vedic period. So early Vedic period did not have any temples. How was the Varna system? Now, Varna system should not be confused with the caste system that we see in the society today. That was a later deterioration of the Varna system. So, what was the Varna system? It was the division of society. The society was divided into four groups based on occupation called the Varna system. So, society was divided into four groups totally based on occupation. So right now you can divide the society as teachers, doctors, engineers, laborers. So, as in the same way, early Vedic society was also divided into four groups based on occupation. This point should not be forgotten that the Varna system was based on occupation. Now, the first came the Brahmins, who were the priest class performing religious rites and imparting education. So, Brahmins, we have this misconception, who is a Brahmin? One who does puja. No, Brahmins were basically teachers of the society. So, their duties were to impart education. Now, teaching happened in various fields like teaching grammar, teaching science or Vigyan, teaching literature, teaching spirituality. So Brahmins were expert in different fields. They had different departments of teaching. So their duty was to impart education, and so they were the priestly class who performed religious rites. Warrior class were the Kshatriyas, whose duty was to protect the tribe from external attack. So they were the soldiers or the rulers, and their duty they acted as the security of the people from external attacks. Vaishyas were the traders or the merchants who engaged in farming, trade, and economic activities. So, Vaishyas were the people who were businessmen or who engaged in commercial activities. Shudras were the lowest rank and they served the upper classes. So, just like laborers today, Shudras were the people in the lowest rank, and it is said that their duty was to serve the upper classes. Now, this was non hereditary, means a son of Brahman may not become a Brahman. A son of Brahman may become a Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra. A son of a Vaishya through education could become a Brahman. So it was a non hereditary system. Varna initially was based on occupation, not birth. Later changes happened when Varna became rigid and hereditary in the later Vedic period. That we will discuss in our next video. So early Vedic system allowed change in Varna based on profession. So suppose a Brahmin son decides to do business, then he will become a Vaishya. Thus there was social mobility based on what kind of profession you wanted to do. Economy. How did the people support their livelihood? That can be discussed under the head of economy. So, early Aryans were nomadic with cattle as their most valued possession. So, the people of the early Vedic times were nomadic, means they did not settle in one place for a very long time. So, cattle was their most valued possession. There were frequent battles for cattle. Cows symbolized wealth. So, just like for money, different countries fight. Similarly, since the only one form of wealth was cattle, therefore, there were frequent battles for cattle. And the number of cows one had, the richer they were. So, cows symbolized wealth. Cultivated land with wooden plows, knowledge of different seasons and their effects. So, land was cultivated with wooden plows, and people had knowledge of different seasons and what how the seasons affected agriculture. So, they had knowledge of the impact of weather on crops. That is how they developed agriculture, and their main tool for agriculture was wooden plow. Artisans included carpenters, chariot makers, weavers, leather workers, potters, and smiths. So these were different kinds of professions in which the people engaged. Metal work was also there. Metals were used for production of weapons, and tools were mostly made out of bronze because iron was not existing in the early Vedic period. Villages were self-sufficient in goods and services. So all the villages were self-sufficient. A village was divided into many parts. Each part contained people who were experts in certain special jobs. So thus the village was self-sufficient in goods and services. Cow held Cow was held in high regard. Terms like Gavisti for battle and Duhitri for milker of cow show importance. So cow was the central part of the early Vedic economy. So they were held in high regard, or they were kept in a great position of respect. So between 1000 BC to 500 BC, economy saw changes with settled agriculture gaining importance, and that was the time of the later Vedic period. Now we will go through the question answers which will help you in your exams. Who were Aryans? The Aryans were nomadic people who lived in Central Asia. As their population increased, they were forced to move out from their original home in search of new sites and new pastures. Those who migrated to India came to be known as Indo-Aryans. Where did the Aryans settle first in India? The Aryans first settled in the Sapta Sindhu region, that is the region of seven rivers. They named it Brahmavarta, which means the land of the gods. What is the main source of information of Indo-Aryans? Our chief source of information for the study of the Vedic age are the Vedas, the sacred texts of the Aryans. Name four Vedas. The four Vedas composed during this period are Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Shama Veda, and the Atharva Veda. What is contained in each of them? The Rig Veda is a collection of prayers offered to several gods such as Agni, Indra, Varuna, and Surya. The Yajur Veda contains hymns and rituals which have to accompany their recitation. The Sama Veda contains tunes for the prayers of the Rig Veda. The Atharva Veda contains songs, spells, and magical charms to cast away evil spirits. In addition to the Vedas, what are the other texts that form a part of Vedic literature? Apart from the Vedas, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, the Upanishads, and the epics Ramayana and Mahabharata were also composed during this period. All these books are collectively known as Vedic literature. Who was a Rajan? What were his duties? The Rajan was the ablest and the strongest man in the tribe who became the king with the consent of the people. He protected them from enemies and looked after their welfare. The king was also acknowledged as their spiritual leader. What were the Sabha and Samiti? Two assemblies called the Sabha and Samiti acted as checks on the king's power. The Samiti was a general assembly comprising the entire tribe, including common people. The Sabha was a council of tribal elders which advised the king in his decisions. Write notes on the position of women in the early Vedic society. Women enjoyed an important position in the society. They were treated as equal to men. They were given opportunities for education. There were women scholars who composed the Vedic hymns. Gargi and Maitreyi were two famous women philosophers during the early Vedic period who participated in philosophical discussions. Women were permitted to participate in all religious ceremonies. In fact, no religious ceremony could be performed without the presence of the wife. Women were allowed to choose their husbands in the ceremony called Swayamvar. Monogamy was the usual practice. There was no child marriage, and widows were allowed to remarry. Discuss the social division of the early Vedic society. Family life. Family was the basic unit of the Vedic society. It was a patriarchal structure. The eldest living male member was the head of the family. He was called the Grihapati. The family was a large joint unit with several generations living under the same roof. Food. The people in the Aryan society ate very simple and nutritious food, which consisted of wheat, barley, maize, fruits, and vegetables. They consumed milk and milk products. They also took intoxicating drinks like soma and suda. Meat was eaten occasionally. Religious beliefs. The Aryans believed in one supreme power, that is, the creator of the universe. They worshipped the various forces of nature in the form of gods. Almost all the important gods were male, a few were female, and the most important god worshipped by them was Indra, the god of rain and thunder. Agni, the god of fire, occupied the second place. Varun was the god of water. Other important gods were Surya, Vayu, Soma, Usha, and Yama. The Rig Vedic people believed that all these gods were different forms of one supreme being. The people worshipped in the open air by chanting hymns and making offerings to gods. The Brahmanas performed yagyas or sacrifices. What were the main occupations of the people during early Vedic period? At first, the Aryans were nomadic people. Thus, the early Vedic period had pastoral economy. Cattle were their most valued possession. There were frequent battles for cattle. The Indo-Aryans also practiced agriculture. The Rig Veda mentions artisans such as carpenter, chariot maker, weaver, leather worker, potter, metal worker who produced weapons and other articles of bronze. The villages were self sufficient during this period. So that was all about the early Vedic period. Please go through the previous videos in order to understand the ancient history in a much better way. So thank you for your love and support. In our upcoming video, we will discuss about the later Vedic period along with the important question answers. Support me so that I can bring brighter contents in future. Thank you once again.